Good afternoon, guys, and welcome to the podcast. I've got Bill Gruber here from Boston, Massachusetts, and he's got an interesting take. He's an entrepreneur, he's an author, he's a pilot, he's written several books. I'm really excited to have him on the show to talk about his journey and his book, The Leadership Blueprint. He's also venture capital, medical device, and really interesting to have him on the show. So, Bill, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chris. It is a pleasure to be here. I am honored. I've watched many of your podcasts and you have extraordinary guests on, and I'm delighted to join you.
Yeah. So just share your journey. It looks like you were at Procter Gamble and now you're at Boston Scientific and doing amazing things. Just enlighten us and we'll dive into the question.
Sure. Like all of us, our careers are these circuitous paths that we are different than we ever have laid them out to be or we thought they'd be. Mine is no different, right? I think part of that is us just chasing opportunities as they come about that intrigue us. And so I was Procter Gamble for 5 years. I was in sales there. But then I received a call from Boston Scientific, and they're looking for salespeople who wanted to go into marketing and product development. So I took that job, and I was at Boston Scientific for 10 years. And I was in peripheral vascular medicine and then worked my way into marketing and product development. That's what took me from Portland, Oregon at the time with Procter & Gamble out here to Boston. And then after about 10 years there, several of us left to start doing startup medical device companies, venture capital funded startup medical device companies. And that's what I did for the remainder of my career. I went to work for an orthopedics company as the head of sales, doing lumbar and cervical fusion products, and then left there, did a cerebrovascular monitoring device for a year, and then ultimately worked with some venture capitalists to start a women's health company focused on removing fibroids in patients with abnormal uterine bleeding. And then after that, the same group of venture folks said, hey, we've got another one with some issues, so why don't you jump into this one? And that was a female stress incontinence company. And some were great successes and others were complete failures. And I think the fascinating thing is, as we go through this, is just this, we're learning as much as we can. And to your listeners, is they're coming here to say, okay, so how do I get financial freedom and how do I get time freedom, right? And how do I get location freedom? Part of that is what kind of scar tissue can I hopefully share from my career with your listeners so they can walk away maybe a little smarter than I was when I started my career. It would have been nice to learn some scar tissue from others. I can help that, all the better.
Yeah, fantastic introduction. And there's so many things I want to ask you about team and venture capital. One thing is I've talked to a lot of extraordinary people, and one of the things is they have so many successes. How do you manage failure? How do you view failures? Everybody's had them. We always focus on the successes, but talk about something we're in.
Yeah, it is a great question. And I think part of it's you have to get into the mindset. You have to have that personality that you have to know it's inevitable. And in fact, my attitude is you have to learn to welcome it, because I don't think we can achieve great success without some failure along the way. And in fact, the whole goal and the things I've learned is that if you can fail fast, all the better, right? It's the slow failures that really hurt, right? But the fast failures you can learn from and you can move on, grow and move on. And my whole focus has been, how is it that I can fail fast, learn as fast as I possibly can? And I think your other podcast guests are of that same kind of mindset, which is there's an interesting thread that's common across all of your guests, which is they're all very big self-help freaks, right? They're always trying to figure out how to skin the cat better. How can we do things a little bit better? And I think we got into failure, and I have had some failure. A great example is we had one of the ventures I was with. We were running out of money and I had to lay everybody off. And it came down to the last group that I was begging for money for. Otherwise, the whole thing was going to go under. And I had already severanced the whole team. I was just going to work in my own office with the light on, and it was getting close to Christmas. And I had given everybody a severance, and this was it, my last phone call. And I was just waiting for the result as to whether this group was going to give us $5 million in funding, and that would trigger $12 million more in other funding. And so it came down to, my people could all go get other jobs. I had basically told them we're out of money, but I kept doing my staff meetings every Monday. And I said, you don't have to call in because you're no longer employees, but if you want, I'll give you an update. So the whole staff would keep calling in every Monday that I was continuing to raise money. And got that phone call on a late Friday night, and they said, we're going to give you the money. So I called all the employees back and I said, if you still want to come back to work, come back on Monday. And everybody showed up and we kept going. And I think the one learning I had there was don't do it in isolation and make sure you're communicating with your teams really well. And these teams they're all bright people. I think great leaders don't hide things from their team. They work with their team to let them know exactly what's going on and keep them up to speed. Otherwise, my people would have all gone and left and gotten jobs somewhere else. And they probably should have, right? For that matter. But we went back to work on Monday and kept pounding away at it.
Yeah, I really love that. And because I ask all entrepreneurs about failure, because there's a recurrent theme. The other thing is you hear about the greats like the Metas and Apple, the Googles and Coinbase, and talk about the dangers of early success too quickly, like super stardoms, very fast, like a rocket ship, no failures. Talk about the dangers of that, especially in VC.
Yeah. So probably the greatest, one of the things that was a deflection of my own, which I always wanted to be promoted too fast, right? So when I was started, I was like, yeah, every 2 years, I got to get a promotion. I got to make more money. What's the next title I have to get so I can keep going ahead? And what I've learned over the time was that if in fact you got promoted too fast, there's a real big downside to that, because then you're in a position you're completely incapable of doing, and you're going to get a huge black mark on your career because you might get fired. And so part of it was this impatience, right? I've got to keep going. I've got to get ahead. I've got to have this career success. And it took me a while to realize that there was some level of patience I needed in order to make sure that I was growing the breadth of my knowledge as opposed to just my career title, right? And so when we take that into venture, we can see a lot of these companies that do really well. And some of that could be circumstantial, right? That, hey, they just had the right product at the right time and everybody needed it. And boom, it was a terrific success. Only to potentially be followed by some horrific failure because reality set in and you have to do it the hard way. And some of our ventures some of them broke even. And then we had one, Interlace Medical, was a huge success. It returned 9 times capital to investors. But then the one after that was a failure. And that was an interesting one too, because I had great success. But then the last one was a failure, and we lost $50 million worth of venture capital's cash. And I lost a lot of my own cash because I was investing alongside the venture guys too. But I would say that we had so many successes in that last company, technical successes, management successes, overcoming horrendous failure and issues with FDA and things like that, that in my brain, I don't rack that one up other than it was fine. It wasn't a commercial success and the investors lost their money. But I look back at the individual battles that the team faced and all the wonderful things they did. And I take a lot of great lessons from that one as well, right? Back to your question. I think that sometimes moving too quickly and having success can build so much hubris that you end up losing in the end, right? That it can be a tough humility lesson the second time around when you fail.
Yeah, I really love that too, because I look at the people that really had early career successes, like you look at the childhood actors or the superstars or like the high school quarterbacks, and they didn't have that failure to drive them. The late bloomers, they have that kind of drive being just sustained. The other question I have
too early, right?
Yeah, exactly. The other question I have for you is in startups, when is it appropriate to take venture capital versus kind of bootstrap or do you use just traditional methods of financing? What is the advantage of venture capital? Because, that's like the holy grail of this kind of startups and like get venture capital. Talk about like when you need it and when you don't need it.
Yeah, that's a great question. And you could, part of it. So the big conundrum is ownership, right? Is that people say, I don't want to raise venture capital because I must give up a lot of my ownership. But then, okay, so you're going to then find it from friends and family, but there's a limit on how wealthy your friends and family are, right? Depending on the circles you come from, you might not have a tremendous amount of access to capital. And what I tend to look at is its speed to market and how important is speed to market, because if speed to market is really important, then and you think that you've got a really good idea, then my encouragement is to go find a significant amount of capital in order to shorten the time to market. But if speed to market's not that big of an issue and ownership's even more of a concern of yours, then maybe you can bootstrap it and you could try to sell a little bit and then use the capital you're making from the business to plug back into the business. But the slope of that is much slower than if you could take venture capital, give up a big chunk of the company and hire a ton of people to drive a development time that's really short, a commercialization that's very aggressive, and then an exit, right? Because you can then exit. The other thing is that some people start companies for different reasons, right? So some people may want an evergreen company. They just want a place to go to work and ultimately they'll get a paycheck and it'll go on for many years. Venture capitalists don't think that way, as we all know. Venture capitalists are looking for a return on invested capital, and time is a function of that return. So how fast can we flip that? We were very fortunate. One of our companies, this was an interesting lesson. I knew the venture capitalists and they said, we want to start a company. Will you come help us start a company? And so that's interesting because I'm going to take my first dollars coming from venture, right? And by the way, we don't have a product. So they said, we love women's health. Why don't you come and we'll pay you a small salary, be an entrepreneur in residence, and you figure out where in women's health we should build a company. And so I looked at 6 different areas within women's health, everything from incontinence to abnormal uterine bleeding to endometriosis. And I just went to a gynecology meeting in Las Vegas with a list of questions and asked as many doctors as I could, what's the biggest problem you think you have in treating women? And I was just sucking the words right out of the air, right? So writing as many notes. And I came back from that and I sat with the venture capitalists. They said they don't have a solution for fibroids. So let's figure out something in fibroids. And they're like, okay, let's build a company for surgical removal of fibroids. And we built a company around that and figured out, and they were also writing my marketing specification because I'm like, why is this a tough procedure? They're telling me because it's too long, it's too dangerous. We use RF technology, right? All those things. So they're basically writing my product spec. I just need to make sure that I do all these things and I hand them the product. And in essence, that's what happened. And we raised ultimately $28 million from the existing venture capitalists and a few others, and then sold the company 4.5 years later. So we raised 28, we sold it 4.5 years later for $280 million. And that's one where we went out with no product. We're taking venture money with no product. And we're like, let's figure out what the needs are. Let's meet the need. Let's go out and aggressively do some initial market traction to show and acquire that the dogs will eat the dog food, right? This thing's going to hunt. And then boom, in comes the acquirer. And that for me was just a great lesson and all taught by the venture capitalists, right? The venture capitalists were teaching me how to be this aggressive, hard driving, shorten the time frame, use venture capital, do it that way. But that's not to say that's always the right way, right? Look at some other people who've done a great job doing the kind of the slow build, but then they own the majority of it, right? And those guys are going to make tons of money. Now, our employees did very well in that situation. The employees made money.
Yeah, really great advice. And it reminds me because when I was watching The Social Network talking about Meta's rise, and one of the co-founders, he was like, yeah, we got to just get advertising and sponsor it. And then Zuckerberg was like, no, we got to move to Silicon Valley and raise VC because this is a big thing. We saw the trend. So what is the optimal team size? How do you manage teams in a startup versus a very mature company? How does it differ?
Yeah. So part of that, and I just love your question. So the big companies have problems with culture, right? So sometimes there can be this endemic culture and people work in big companies for a reason. They work there because it's secure and it's safe and everybody has their narrow column of expertise. But in a startup, we're all wearing 5 hats. So if I'm the president of the startup, I'm raising money. So I'm a salesperson. I'm helping out the clinical team. So I'm in teaching procedures if I need to be. I'm hiring people. I'm legal, right? So I'm working with a venture capitalist. So that's what we love about the startups is that we get to wear all these different hats and we're learning so much. But in the big company, not only is there this kind of stoic or I guess, value system set in place. In the startups, we can set that, right? So we can make sure we hire people with similar values to us that are hard driving and love working without a net. We love risk. We want to do a project, like build a company in 5 years and exit and do the next one. And we want to do them like boxcars, right? So we just want to line them up. And so that's a different mindset than what we find in the larger companies. Regardless, I think in both companies, if we are leaders of both companies, if you're the CEO of your small startup, or if you are a manager within a larger organization, the one thing that we need to do is we need to make sure that everyone knows what the ultimate goal is of the company. And all of their duties have to be tied to that, right? So they all have to they know that their job's important. And then what we have to do with all those people is we have to make sure that they see that there is a path for their own career. And you as the leader are going to show them how you're going to help them develop their own career by contributing to the team so the team hit its objectives as well, right? And that may mean that they need cross-training. You need to put them into different areas so that, back to our very first point, they're not standing on the head of a pin with no breadth of knowledge and they crash, right? We need to pack in this breadth of knowledge. So we need to reinvest in the employees. So I think that happens in both those instances, whether you're working for a startup or you're working for a big corporation. Once we sold our company, the big corporation who bought our company said, why don't you come here back to the big company and you can work here. We'll find a position for you. I was like, no, I'm done. I could never go back to a big company because I've seen what liberation looks like, and to be able to create culture, master culture. We have our own values, right? We hire people for our values. So we end up with people who think the same way, because now we can move mountains really fast. We used to laugh when we were in the startups. We said, our startup can do in 1 month what it would take a large company to do in a year and a half, because we don't get paralysis with decisions. We just make a decision. If it's bad, we can have 3 bad decisions, fix it long before the big company ever makes the decision on the first one, right? We're already 3 cycles deep in decisions because there's just a different pace. As one of the venture capitalists said, he said, you're moving Mach 5 with your hair on fire. That's the goal of being in the small startup, right? We need to just have huge achievement on a daily basis.
Yeah, really. And what you're describing is really akin to what Bezos and Elon Musk, how they approach teams and managing teams. And I know we have around 4 or 5 minutes, and I really enjoyed talking to you. So one thing that you talk about is that OKR, and as a leader, what is OKR, and explain how you successfully implemented it in your team as a leader.
Yeah, so great question. So OKRs are not my own. And those objectives and key results really have been around for a bunch of years and go back far beyond, back into the 50s and 60s, like management of MBOs and all the rest of that stuff. But John Doerr wrote about it best in Measure What Matters, right? It's a great book. And what I did is I basically took that and put it into my last 2 startups, is making sure that everyone knew what our goal was. If we were going to help women with abnormal uterine bleeding, or we were going to help women with incontinence, everybody knew, and we would sit in the room as a team and figure out what is success and what do we need in order to drive success. And those have to be smart objectives. They have to be specific and measurable and achievable, right? And they have to be time bound. They'd be really specific. And that feeds into these objectives and key results. Then once we have the corporate objectives and key results, we make sure everybody else's starts with those. So everybody else's objectives and key results are the same, right? Or they come from those. And that's management layer 1. Management layers 2, those people their objectives and key results come from those as well. And that's how we're tying somebody who's 5 levels deep in the organization. They can see how their daily job, their daily role fits into achieving the corporate mission and the corporate goal. And the whole benefit there is so people don't think that they're working on some obtuse project that their boss has them working on that has no relevance to the organization whatsoever, because nothing's more miserable than working on a project that you don't think is having an impact on the organization.
Yeah, I love that. And John Doerr is actually, he was VC, came from Rice, and my alma mater. And Very fascinating. How can people, because I know you wrote a book, talk about all this conversation, how can they find it and how can they learn more about you and visit you and reach out to you?
Yeah, thanks for that. So the book is, as you said, the leadership blueprint. They can go to my website and the link's on the website. It's billgruber.com, BILGRUBER.com. And certainly for your listeners, anybody else, the one thing I put on there that's free, because I can never fit it in the book, was a recruiting guide, right? A recruiting binder. And I just put them all in as Word documents. And your listeners can just key in their email. And I'm just preserving emails if I write another book. But then they can download all the Word documents and make it their own and use it to hire people with similar values for their own teams. And it'll save them a load of work. Something I wish I had when I was much younger. But this has been a pleasure speaking with you. I really do appreciate it. And thank you for putting out such good content. I just love listening to your podcasts and look forward to listening to many more.
Thank you. I love spreading spreading good vibes and connecting with guests such as you, and really enjoyed it. Keep up the great work.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris.